So, continuing on with my digital story presentation, I am now looking at some upper elementary school applications, and this particular example is one in which elementary school children in a science and technology concentration were creating argumentative public service announcements. And this particular example is one where the students went around the school, filmed themselves, and talked about different methods that you can recycle. In this presentation, a reading teacher, instead of reviewing as the curriculum prescribes a state history in the informational sense of just providing the students with some text and some pictures in class, the teacher in this case created a digital story. Again, this format for creating digital stories about places works really with any grade level. For instance, middle school and high school students that are doing a cross-class collaboration, let's say students in Canada or Australia, United States, and possibly Japan, they can easily make a digital story about where they live or the part of the country they live in, including cultural and geographic information, and then share that out with their partner schools. Okay. Doing digital stories that are biographies of famous people, be it in the social studies curriculum, English curriculum, possibly authors, math curriculum, famous mathematicians, science curriculum, famous scientists. These are all other ways to use digital storytelling and to involve students in exploring the life of a famous person. In this case, the teacher introduced that concept by doing a biography on Martin Luther King. This is an interesting digital story in which a child that came to the United States from Pakistan, working with his English as a second language teacher, did a digital story about what it's like from the point of view of an English language learner to adjust to a new culture and learn a new language. And it's really a very provocative story. You can hear the student's accent, and he does go through his struggles of being here in this country and has images of his home and his life in Pakistan and contrasted with the small apartment that he now lives in the United States. It's a very moving story, and I think it's a great digital story to show classroom teachers so they could better understand the experiences of an English language learner. At any time you take a field trip, you probably know budget can be tight, but taking pictures during the field trip and then having your students or yourself capture that experience in a digital story can be a powerful way to convince administrators and parents why that field trip should continue to be part of the student's school experience. In this particular slide, I have an example from a fourth grade class, actually two fourth grade classes and one preschool. The fourth graders for a social studies unit visited a museum that is about Native Americans. The fourth graders visited a local science museum, and the preschool children each week visit a farm and have a time to interact with the animals there. And in all three of these digital stories, you do see images of the children in the settings. So again, field trips are wonderful experiences to create digital stories. If you're working with middle school and high school students, they could easily create those digital stories. They could take their own pictures, get together in small groups, and do the stories. This is a case where an elementary school teacher in the past had held a parent event at the end of the year at which students read their poems aloud to the parents. Once the teacher learned about the power of digital storytelling, this last year she tried a different method. She had each of the students take their poems, which they illustrated, and they uploaded them into a digital story app, and then they read their poems. By doing it this way, the children had a chance to re-record their readings of the poems until they had it. So they liked it and were willing to show that version to the parents. So that got rid of a lot of the jitters they might have in terms of performing in front of a public audience. It also expedited the event when the parents showed up, and the parents really appreciated seeing the digital stories done in that format. Also, when they went home, they had the opportunity to review the digital story again for the class, and they had the opportunity to share it out with relatives and friends. And the teacher indicated that from now on, that is how she's going to do the poetry celebration each year. Digital story works well for presenting to students content in the science curriculum. Either the teacher can make those digital stories or the students can. And I do recommend starting in the middle school that the students have the opportunity to do that. It's a fantastic way for the students to learn the content, and to interact with it, and to be able to teach it to others. In this case, the teacher did a digital story on how we hear, which was a very hard concept for her students to understand when they read about it in the textbook. So she took various images and narrated for them the information at an appropriate level for fifth graders to understand. This is another one that was done, and this one celebrates an event at the school as well as recapping part of the science curriculum. This is an event that's held annually, and by recapturing in a digital story format, it's something that can be looked at throughout the year, and also can be shown to students the following year right before the event occurs again. Book trailers are always an excellent way to use digital stories for whatever grade level it might be. Librarians might want to create their own book trailers, or have students in the school do it and keep them on computers in the library for students to take a look at, and that would encourage students to want to take out books. In this case, a fifth grade teacher did a book trailer for Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind, and then there's a second case here where the teacher did one for her second graders. Animoto works really well for this. It keeps the book trailers very short, and it's really very easy to do. But iMovie can be done, and iMovie actually has in it a template for creating movie trailers, which really works well for just doing book trailers. And here's another example. This one was done with Powtoon. It was for a middle school class, and Powtoon's another app that can be used. Okay. This is another case, a lot like the fifth grade case, where the teacher had an event at the end of the year, and basically this event was not so much an in-person event, but the students wrote book reviews, they word processed them, printed them out, and they made it into one book that would reside on the bookcase for students the following year to look at. As you can imagine, that really very much limits the audience. So this year, the teacher had the students narrate their book reviews in one collaborative digital story. And so next year, when the new students come in, they could access on any device the digital story and go through the book reviews at any time. They would also hear the voice of other sixth graders that would be reviewing the books. So again, this is a kind of digital application of digital storytelling that can be done at any grade level. Here's another case of taking very difficult science material and converting it into a digital story. This is a case where a special ed teacher and a classroom teacher worked together. They were doing a unit on plant cells, and what they did is they create a digital story using the concept of analogy and compared plant cells to a city. And so they broke apart very difficult material for the students doing it in this fashion. This is a digital story I came across very recently, and this particular library got a gigantic donation of funding to purchase new books. And here the point I want to make is if any library has an opportunity to want to feature book events, book celebrations, digital storytelling is a great way to capture it. And if you have permission to include students in that digital story, by all means, showing images of the students, looking at the books, reading from the books is a great idea. Middle school math, any kind of concept you want to break apart can be converted into a digital story. By middle school, students could certainly be making their own tutorials to teach their peers or even students at a lower grade level particular math concepts. This is an example of a digital story in the science curriculum. And the teacher who made it did it for a special ed student who was not able to read the textbook. So she created it visually. It's about the planets, and she has images of each of the planets and information about each of the planets in it. She did find that her special ed students were able to use this digital story app, and some of the students that were afraid to get up in front of their class and do a PowerPoint presentation did check in with their teachers, and they were able to create a digital story ahead of time and use that to show as their presentation. This is a middle school case where students did a digital story as a preview or a public service announcement about an upcoming play at their school. So announcing upcoming events at the school, be it plays, sports events, any type of celebration by students creating a digital story to bring an audience in is another application of digital storytelling. This particular digital story, if you have time to review it afterwards, can be used in any environment just about. It's a wonderful one that was made by a reading teacher. It's a biography of Helen Keller's life, and the teacher has excellent voice for narration. In this case, created by a middle school teacher for social studies, the teacher used images from the Dust Bowl to bring to life for students what it was like during the Great Depression and to live through the Dust Bowl. It's another very good one to look at if you have time afterwards, because it's another case in point where the teacher has an outstanding voice at narration. This particular digital story is a public service announcement. It's also informational, and the person that did this wanted to convince people of the power of young adult literature, that it should not just be read by young adults, but adults as well. And I like this digital story in the sense that the person who created it had very limited access to technology, so I suggested she download the iMovie app to her phone, which is what she did. And she ended up creating a very powerful digital story. Her husband did the narration, and he has a voice that sounds very professional. And this digital story, if you teach English, language arts, middle school, high school, please consider showing it to your students for a discussion. She actually shared out the digital story with 8th graders in another state in Iowa. We're in Connecticut, and those students watched the digital story, and then she sent them a Google Form survey for them to fill out about their interest in young adult literature. And so she created some blog post about that collaboration. I have links there that you can access more information. Okay. This is another excellent use of digital storytelling. It's based on the I'm From poem, and I do have a slide coming up that captures the experience of the origin of I'm From. This was done by a school librarian, and it is a way of creating your own biography or autobiography in the format of a digital storytelling. She did a great job. She has a wonderful voice in this digital story, and she's also somebody who initially was very afraid of creating a digital story, and her final version of it really turned out well. And I think this is a great concept to do with middle school and high school students, and probably a version can be done with elementary school at a more basic level. So this is a concept of where I am from. It's from a blog post, a website online. I do have a link here, and you can learn more about the concept of where I'm from poetry by visiting this particular site.